All right. So here we are. This is a little bit of a take two of us taking over the Single on Purpose podcast. This is Dené, and I'm here with my baby daddy, my ex, and one of my best friends on the planet, Mykee Selkin. And before we get started and I bring you in, I have to say, just sort of to state for the record that we tried to record this once before and it didn't exactly work out. So we're doing another round with hopefully no technical difficulties this time. But Mykee, thank you for agreeing to sit down with me and talk a little bit about our relationship. Before I have you introduce yourself, I just want to say, like, the reason I wanted to sit down with you is I think people are always a little bit fascinated, which I find kind of fascinating, but not, because it feels like it's pretty easy, for the most part, for us to work out our relationship. But people are always fascinated by our dynamic. And because I think that we are doing divorce a little bit differently than has been historically the way that people handle divorce, I thought it might be interesting for us to sit down and record a podcast together. So thank you for doing this. I know that even though you are sort of a public person, you do films and you have a film out right now, a big Christmas movie. But you're a little bit more private, I think, with your private life. So I appreciate you doing this with me. Will you tell? Yeah.
I would love to talk about our relationship and how we are parenting together beautifully, as you said.
Yeah, I think we do a good job. Will you tell everybody who's listening a little bit about you and who you are, all that good stuff, like what you do and stuff?
Well, as you said, you alluded to, I'm a film and television actor. I started out modeling and moved into film and television. And I do have a Christmas movie out, a couple actually, Designing Christmas on Discovery Plus. Sensational Christmas on Lifetime. But I do that. Also, I like to do renovation of homes, and you've actually assisted me in that.
Have I? That feels like, that feels nice here. Have I done that?
Yeah, you kind of usually just said, I don't like that. I don't like that. You should do this.
I think it normally sounds more like, I want to go away from this hot mess right now.
Yeah. But yeah, that's and obviously a father of a 5-year-old that I share with you, and who loves his dual households.
Yeah.
And so just a little bit about me.
Yeah. So you and I have been consciously uncoupled. I feel like it's so funny how much pushback Gwyneth Paltrow got when she sort of referred to her relationship with Chris Martin that way. But I think that that's a little bit like what we've been attempting to do. And we've been consciously uncoupled now for a little over 3 years. What?
3 years, yeah.
Some things don't change. I'm like, how long has it been? And, I think it's interesting. It feels so much easier. And I don't know, you tell me how you feel about this, but I think in so many ways, our relationship feels a lot easier. I feel like we are able to love one another a lot better a lot of times as friends than we did when we were in relationship. And I sort of have my own hypotheses on that. But I'm curious to hear from you. What I think you do such a beautiful job of, and I will say about you often, is just really making sure that your son always feels how much you love and respect his mother. And thank you for that, first of all. But how do you do that, I guess? And was that like a conscious decision that you made, or will you speak a little bit about like how you got to that place?
Well, yeah, it's definitely a conscious decision that he knows that there's still love between us, and that the two people that created him care for each other. I don't want him to see any kind of overt conflict or struggle or something like that, which we don't have generally. But yeah, I wanted him to know that there was love. There was love in both households, and that he was loved. And then, yeah, just I feel I have a job to set him up for potentially when he goes to love somebody, what it might look like. And no matter who he loves, that he has to treat that person with respect, and that he shows his love in a conscious way, in a conscious manner. And so I feel, by me displaying that to you, he can pick up on that. I feel like kids always, they don't necessarily listen to you, but they follow your actions. So everything was a conscious effort. But then, like I said, you're easy to deal with, and now that we're not
that's really nice to hear you say that, Mykee. I'm just kidding.
So yeah, I think, like you said, when we consciously uncoupled, it was a lot different. I think there was a moment where, I don't know, you left a cabinet door open or something like that after we decided to separate, and it was like, I don't care. She can do whatever she wants.
What's so funny about that? I often reference that story, and just to give everybody listening a little bit of background, when I work with couples, I often tell the story about how we went to couples therapy early in our marriage, and it used to drive you crazy that I would leave all of the cabinet doors open, and our couples therapist at the time was like, then stop closing them, right? Like there's this like unconscious resistance, rebellion a lot of times in our partner when we are constantly attempting to tell them what to do or assert our will upon them or whatever. And so I feel like I do a much better job of closing cabinets. But I often use that example with couples around the thing that we are just like so adamant that our partner needs to change. What we resist persists, right? And so it was fascinating. Like when you stopped closing the cabinets for me and holding all that resentment that you were holding about, the cabinets being open, all of a sudden I looked up one day and all the cabinet doors were open because I hadn't been closing them and you hadn't been closing them behind me. And I was like, oh, that's what he's talking about. The cabinet doors are open. But I think that's so often the case that like the overfunctioner, which is really funny because we talk about overfunctioner, underfunctioner dynamics a lot, like in the mental health field. And in our dynamic, you were in a lot of ways the overfunctioner in our relationship. I was the underfunctioner. And the overfunctioner, for those of you who aren't familiar with that phrase, is the person who's, I think I see now that there was a lot of codependency in our relationship. I think both of us probably couldn't see it when we were together, but the overfunctioner is the person who sort of picks up more of the slack, like, does the things that the underfunctioner is perfectly capable of doing for themselves, but doesn't have to because there's someone sort of there functioning for them. Now, they feel a great deal of resentment about all of that overfunctioning they're doing oftentimes. And I often would feel that, but I just think it's funny that those are the things that you can sort of see in retrospect, that it's tough to see when you're in the middle of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When you're in the eye of the storm, you can't really see a way out. But yeah, once you're out of it, you definitely start noticing the things, especially like you said, with the cabinet doors, once they weren't being closed, you're like, oh. And I think, I think often when when a relationship ends, that's when the greatest transformation happens. Some of the things your partner has said or you start saying, oh yeah, I can see that now. Just unfortunate that sometimes that we don't see it while we're in the moment, or that we're not receptive to it, or we can't hear them. We just kind of tune it out and think, whatever, you're nagging me, you're bothering me, whatever,
Yeah.
But, I just, if we could all just become better communicators, I guess, and really just able to communicate with your partner how it makes you feel. I think even, again, the example of the cabinets is if I was to better explain to you how it made me feel, that might have solved it. The cabinets, at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's a greater discussion, right? Because I think you telling me, I think you probably did tell me how you leaving the cabinets.
And you were like, screw that.
I just didn't care, right? And that is a much larger conversation in and of itself. But I'd be curious from your perspective, as you talk about sort of in retrospect, how you can look back and we're in a good place. So I think it's a lot easier to do this than it can be sometimes for other people. But what do you understand about, I'm going to ask you to say what you understand about yourself in our relationship dynamic that you couldn't see when we were in it, right? Like, what do you see that you used to do in relationships that you're like, oh, I kind of see that aspect of myself now a little more clearly?
Yeah. Well, with time comes wisdom. And I can definitely see, you talked about codependency, and I can definitely see that now, where sometimes, I wanted you to do stuff with me or be interested in the things that I'm interested in. And that's not fair, So, and there's other things that we could potentially mesh on, but we didn't have to mesh on everything, or things that I wanted. So yeah, I can definitely see now the codependency. I can also see just, when you have time to work on yourself, you kind of start to realign what your values are, what you want. And then you're like, oh yeah. And you just kind of, focus on that. And then you naturally attract people who want to do that, potentially, if that's what you want. But you also, to find a group of friends, I guess, or whatever you're interested in.
It's okay to want to be with people, Mykee.
Yeah, but I just mean, like, while you're finding yourself, sometimes it's good to, just find yourself. But anyway, but yeah, like I said, I can see the codependency stuff in reflection.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said something about like alignment with your values, which is so interesting because Vanessa and I just had this amazing interview with a therapist earlier this morning. And she was saying that the key to sort of healing some of these codependent dynamics is really not expecting another person to be your parent or heal you in the ways that you are longing for someone to see you in the ways that you've always longed to be seen, but really sort of bringing your adult self to the table and saying, is this relationship, this person in alignment with my values and what I want for myself and who I see myself becoming? And I think a lot of times, and we've talked about this, I think you probably saw a lot of potential in me, and I love you for that. I think there were a lot of ways you saw that I could be a lot more in terms of like who I was showing up as in our dynamic. And yet that person sort of can't get there because we drag them along. It's like, I see you could be more. I see you could do more. We get there when we're ready to, right? And I think that's a lot of times the challenge is like not falling in love with potential, but really like falling in love with the person that's sitting right there in front of you in this moment, right?
Yeah. You're absolutely right. I can also say that I've had friends say, this is a direct quote, where they just really see me and I think it's really important for someone to see you, and like you said, not the potential, but see who you are right now, or like what you're doing or what you're passionate about, and really just respecting that and want to celebrate that as well, So and not drag them along saying, you need to do this, you need to do that, or I'm telling you what you're doing wrong is this, I don't think anyone wants that in a partner.
Yeah, because then it starts to feel like that parent, right? And I read somewhere that, the part of us that wants to be loved unconditionally for the truth of who we are, and that's what we longed for from that parent, that parental figure, will always resist changing for the partner that doesn't see us as like enough where we are. So like, no matter what, like it's not conscious, but we'll be in resistance to making that change because we just want to be loved unconditionally, which I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's what we all want, right?
No, I mean, maybe. I don't know. So let's go back for a minute to when we were still married and you were sort of in the space of, and I've talked about this before, that I think like what goes on between two people in a marriage when they make the decision to end their marriage is a really sacred space and time. So like without like the details of, whatever, how did you sort of grapple with whenever people are breaking up? I think what I hear most is like, I feel like I'm a failure, right? And I wonder like what came up for you around all of that. You and I were married for 11 and a half years. We had a 2-year-old at the time, little boy. How did you sort of wrestle with this idea that society feeds us that it is like a failure when a marriage ends?
How did I wrestle with that?
What was that like for you, Mykee?
Well, I did wrestle with that. I don't know if your listeners know or not, but we went to therapy. We went to therapy before.
Well, they do now. We went to therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy always.
Yeah. But we were trying to make it work, and we went to therapy, and it was really helpful. Not necessarily keep us together, I guess. But
but that's good. As a marriage therapist, I don't think the goal should be to keep us together. But carry on.
Well, yeah, it was really good just to notice our paradigms, and in noticing that, some of that was like, oh, that's why you do that, or that's why I do this. And from that,
like, what's an example? Will you give us an example? I'm fascinated.
I don't even remember really, but just our family dynamics are different. Just to give you an example, just the way we grew up. Of like, I'm all about family together, and everyone together, and you're more family
introverted, avoidant, introverted. I'm good. Go be by myself.
Yeah. So with that said, that always was something that we headbutted on. But understanding more of your upbringing, not even just your upbringing, but how you move through the world. And I'm like, that's why it's such a conflict for her, Not to say that you had conflict, but I'm in your family dynamics. I'm just saying that we had conflict because the way we grew up, our styles didn't mesh necessarily.
Yes.
And so that was one thing. But anyway, so going to therapy was helpful for that, to understand more from your side, your point of view. And then, then it was, some things became easier to consciously uncouple, because I was like, I get it. This is why it's not working. I don't know if it's going to work, but, I do care for this person quite a bit, and, we'll have to make it work one way or another. And, but then from that, it was definitely difficult to end a relationship of 11 and a half years, the mother of my child. But, so it was really hard, especially like my family took it hard. Everyone was crying and they thought everything was great. And
I'm so worth crying over. It's hard to lose me. Sorry.
Okay.
I feel a little good that everyone was crying. Is that wrong?
I think they were crying over it. Anyway. Yeah, but anyway, and yeah, it was definitely hard just to, now all of a sudden you're single. And for me, I was the one who moved out, and I, in my 1-bedroom apartment, just kind of sitting there starting over, and it's scary. It's unnerving. I worked all my life. I worked up to this point, of trying to get married, buy the house, and have the child, and to say now it's all gone was really hard. And I just had to keep thinking to myself, okay, this isn't the end. This is just a new chapter. And really, just like I said, looking in, figuring out what I want. And thankfully, we have a great son, and he was able to adjust and have a great ex-partner. So co-parenting has been easy, as far as like, you see him then, I see him then, pick up, drop off, all the rest of it. It's been seamless. So I'm really fortunate. I know not everyone has that. And yeah, so it was definitely difficult, but like I said, thankfully on the other side, there was light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, thank you for speaking so honestly about the fear, because I think these are the moments that, first of all, we don't hear men often speak about, like when a marriage ends, what that feels like for you. like within your psyche and in your body to like I felt that as you were describing. I've worked for a lifetime to build this life and buy this home and have this child with this person, and now here I am in an apartment alone by myself. And I think that is a really scary space and time to be in. And I think it's important to share that aspect of our relationship and not just it's just been so easy, because I think, and what I have gotten in terms of feedback on, like a few months ago, I did a podcast with John where I was talking a little bit about our breakup, and someone gave me feedback in one of our, like, we run these groups for Tat Lab and we've sort of continued them, but someone gave me the feedback, like, sometimes it's really hard to hear you talk about your ex and just like how easy it is, because that's not my situation. And like, I think it was like over Thanksgiving, and she was like, it's just like painful sometimes to hear, oh, it's just so easy, and it's not easy for me. And I don't think, it was always like a cakewalk. There's certainly feelings that come to the surface. As you said, we cared for each other very much. And I also think, though, the universe sort of gives us direction that we need when we need it. I don't know if I've ever told you this, but the day that we decided to allow our relationship to transition into a friendship, which is what I like to call it, I was listening to Mark Grove's podcast, Create the Love, and he had this woman on. I don't even remember her name, but she was talking about how she and her ex-husband had decided to have like one family home, and they each got apartments, and then the children would stay in the home and they would come in and out. And it was like literally what I was listening to as I was driving home before you and I had like the conversation, to call it or whatever. But I think that that's, to me, such an example of like the universe was preparing me for like, don't be so afraid, right? Like, you're going to be okay. It was sort of like, that was where my mind went, that conversation that I just heard her having of like, there are ways to do this where it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be the greatest catastrophe of your life. Children can be okay. And she was speaking to her experience of that. So again, that's why it's not us, from my perspective, speaking to like, oh, this is just like a cakewalk and we do this perfectly. I mean, we're humans, of course, like, we're going to have moments where we're annoyed with one another, like, like frustrated or feeling shortchanged or whatever. But I also think it's important to give people a vision of everything society has taught us about a relationship ending means someone has failed and your life is over, or that's going to be the worst thing that happened to your child. It doesn't have to be that way. Our kid is 5 and he's just like, your friend daddy. Like, he's never known anything that he remembers really, except like us being friends. So he kind of thinks sometimes parents are friends,
Yeah. And, again, we're really fortunate in that he was young when it happened. So, the concept of us being together wasn't really fully formed, I think. And so I know, I can remember, friends in high school when their parents broke up, but they were devastated. I don't know how they broke up, their parents broke up, but I can say that we, consciously broke up, and it was easy, and it was, we tried to make it as seamless, similar to the woman you were talking about in that podcast. Just try to keep one household, keep it the same, and it's just interchanging players basically, so that it wasn't complicated. And I know, like I said, I know it's not easy for everyone, and we were really fortunate that we were able to do that. But yeah, if you can just always try to focus on the children, it's a great North Star, I think, at least, and that's what we tried to do. Was like, okay, is he going to be happy? Then everything else, we can work through it,
Yeah. So
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's like, I'm just sort of like highlighting that as like, I think that is one thing that like you and I both were always in agreement on, is like Cairo's our North Star. He's like the main priority, that he feels good about how we feel about each other. Right. So that's one thing. Is there another thing that you've attempted to keep in mind, or?
You're hitting me up. You want me to have 3 or 4?
I'm like, I need you to give bullet points. I'll share one. I think that like as much as possible, well, I've shared this before, but like, you know, I believe that in every moment we're choosing fear or love. And I think that like to me, the ego is the voice of fear, right? The ego speaks first, the ego speaks loudest, but the still small voice within us is the voice of love. And in every moment, like, you know, that I started to feel afraid. Like I remember like, you know, you were like when you first started dating and like you were introducing your woman that you were dating at the time to our kid, and she was like gorgeous and like so like, you know, young and fun and all of these things. And I was like, okay, fear. Like, you know, like the like insecure voice of like, what if my kid likes this woman more than me, or like whatever, like that stuff comes to the surface, right? And it was like, Dené, get still. What would love say, right? And love said, okay, so this is like another person to love your child. When would that ever be a bad thing? That's always going to be good. So if you make the decision to love her and do everything possible that you can to love her, then it's just going to be easier for you. And I think that that's been another one of the things that I've drawn from in the challenging moments, you know?
Yeah. And, it's to touch on that. I'm glad you brought that up, where is, you know, thank you for having that frame of mind and choosing love over fear. And not only was that good for Cairo, but that was good for everybody, you know, like you said, to hold that like animosity or whatever in your body, or me worried, you know, being trepidatious and like potentially sneaking around or whatever, it would be weird, you know. So,
I'm just laughing because for a while you were living in the guest house and it would have been pretty funny for you to be sneaking around.
Yeah.
But yes.
But yeah, so with that said, you know, if you can have open and honest conversations with your child, one is that child is no longer like picking sides kind of thing, like, or like, yeah, we have to hate this person because mommy or daddy doesn't like them. Like, you don't want to put your child in that situation. And now your child is just like, oh, I have fun with this person. It's another play date, basically, or another friend. And then, you know, I go home to mommy or daddy, you know, and it's great. Like, they still love their mom and dad, you know, unless you're a bad mom or dad, and then I don't know.
Well, and even then, I would say psychologically, they're still probably going to love their mom or dad. But I think what you just said is important, that has to be what you truly believe, because what I have come to understand about children in our kiddos' 5 years of life is that they feel you so deeply. Like I remember when we first broke up, I don't know if I've ever told you this. I don't know how he knew, but like when I first like was sleeping in the bed by myself, it like, you know, it was like, when you've been like sharing a bed with someone for 11 years, it was a little like, holy moly. And when I tell you, this little boy, as soon as we transitioned him into like a bed where he could get out, like he would just like come down the hall every night, get in bed. And it was literally like he was like taking care of me. Now, so many layers to that. But I also think our children are little GPS systems, especially on their mamas, right? And so like he would feel a little bit that like I don't want to say like needing that, because like every part of me did not want him to feel that. But I think that I'm saying all that to say, if there had been any part of me who did feel slighted or, you know, hurt by you dating another person and didn't get in right relationship with that, he would have felt that, you know, but like me feeling like, no, I genuinely am going to like build a relationship with her and, like her on my own terms and like learn to love her because that's what I want for me. It gave him permission to like care about her and not feel like it was in any way going to hurt his mom, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I thank you for that.
Well, that wasn't me asking for a thank you. I'm just saying that I think it's like important that that's actually how you feel.
What?
I think it's important that that's actually how you feel is what I'm saying. I wasn't like tooting my own horn. Not that.
I know that. No, I'm just saying, no, I really appreciate you taking that stance. And, you know, And it gave me permission to take that same stance. You know, when you first had a date, I can remember helping you set it up. You know, this was
We
all
were
happening.
like,
This was all during COVID.
can I tell this story to the listeners? So we had, this is so funny. I was going on a date that was like a blind date that someone had set me up on. And I was like, you were back in the guest house and the heaters, like the outdoor heaters, because we couldn't go inside because it was the middle of COVID. And it was literally like, I was like, Mykee, I need your help. And you like came out and were like setting up the heaters. And I was like, hurry up. He's going to be here any minute. This is going to be so weird. My ex-husband.
I was setting up candles. I was like, I was making
and this is our relationship.
Yeah, people were always a little like, what? So
but you know what's so we are so weird. No, but I mean, it's beautiful.
We're friends. That's what it comes
you
down
are.
to. Being able to be in friendship with somebody. Like, all right, I'm no longer romantically involved with this person, but I still care for this person. How can I be of service to this person? How can I help them?
Well,
and I want this person to have happiness.
Yes. And I think here's the thing that I say to people a lot of times when they talk about being friends with an ex. I say, like, when you can genuinely be happy for that person as they move on to another relationship, then I think you're ready to be friends. But like, for real happy for them. But I think like when there's still energy there, you're not ready. Right. And I think that our dynamic was a little bit different because we were married so long. And I think it's so funny. I'm going to share this with the listeners. We just went and had Thanksgiving. And, you know, again, we're really fortunate that we're still in a space where like our friends, John and Vanessa, were like, do you guys both want to come? And like, we have enough rooms and stuff for like us to all just like have Thanksgiving together. And it sort of ended up being a Friendsgiving, but John and Vanessa had another friend there and she was saying to us and like named something that was actually really healing for me. And I think I told you this on the ride home that she said, you know, it's so funny to me that you and Mykee were married. You guys have a very sibling-like dynamic. Like your banter is very much like your siblings. And it's very just like, there's almost like a comfort and like the energy is just like very brotherly, sisterly. And one, I think that's true. And I think that was true for like a large part of our marriage. But I also think we were so young when we met and when we got married that there are a lot of ways that, and you like, tell me if this feels true for you, but I think there are a lot of ways that when you're young in a relationship, they're different than when you're a little bit like of an adult. Like we were like in our late 20s when we met. And that's very different than being in your, what?
Not late 20s, but
what'd
nonetheless.
You say?
Okay.
Well, we kind of were. Anyways, I think that's very different than the adult version of you. Like I look back at the person I was when we met and she feels like, oh my God, that was a different lifetime. But that's a lot of times what it feels like when you go home for Thanksgiving, right? Like Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened, go home and spend some time with your family. And sometimes like I felt like when we were married, we were just so like we would banter like brother and sister and this is like a larger conversation. I think about what marriages sometimes become if we get too enmeshed in the dynamic, where it's like we don't see that person as like the other, like the person of our desire. Like there's just like too much enmesh is the only word that's coming up. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can speak to what the brother sister dynamic. And then definitely you don't want to lose that spark as I'll say for now of like wanting and yearning for your partner, or going on or having a standing date. You know, I forget the person's name, but they have the CEO, a successful person that was like, he always has a standing date with his wife because that's his most important client. He wants to make sure everything is okay.
Love that.
He checks in, and I was like, okay. I was like, I'm jotting that one down, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's definitely important, you know, and sometimes we don't do that, I think, in relationships. So yeah, you know, making sure that
Jay Shetty.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say checking in and make sure everything's good on the home front. That's all.
Yeah, Jay Shetty said that he does intermittent check-ins with his wife where they do them together, where it's like, how is this relationship going for you? Like what feels really satisfying, what feels less than satisfying, and like getting that feedback and really having the desire for it. And I think it can be hard to be open to that feedback, but if you don't, like really check in with that way, I think that you can go through years just sort of going through the motions. I say often that I think relationships and marriages can be a really comfortable place for people to hide out and avoid doing some of their like deeper inner work and growth, because it's just like comfortable, right? Like we're settled in, like, you know, it's good enough. There's like, we didn't hate each other. I think like a lot of times it's like, I think a lot of people were so taken back by our breakup because we weren't like two people that had like a ton of turmoil, but that can a lot of times be like a lack of life force. You know, we put so much emphasis on the safety, I think, in our society, that this feels safe, this feels secure. I feel like I know this person's not going anywhere. But that can also, you know, we also need aliveness and we need life force and we need eros. And I think sometimes we don't put enough on the emphasis of that, and that we need that balance, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
I know I talk a lot on the podcast, Mykee. So let me ask you this. What do you feel like has been the hardest part about being a single man, single dad, after being married for so long?
Ooh, what's been the hardest part? Well, yeah, dating. I'm sure a lot of your listeners can relate. Like getting back out there and trying to figure out how to get back out there, and telling people you have a child. It feels definitely like a daunting task, but also just starting over. You know, those I think just everything, all of that encompasses just starting over. You know, you're like learning about yourself again, getting you another place, and what do I like in my place, and I have to figure out what my child wants in this place. And while that can be rewarding too, to start over and like, okay, fresh start, let's just do something, it's also challenging and difficult. Um, but then, and then couple that with, okay, you want to get back out there and meet people and do stuff. And that's definitely the hard part. And potentially, I think you alluded to that we've been fortunate where our friend group, we're still connected to them. And it's not like you take those friends, I take these friends. But, for potential people, that could be really hard, where they have to like get a whole new friend circle or friend group, and thankfully that hasn't happened. So, but I know that could be difficult for other people.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you brought that up, because that feels like another bullet point that we can sort of like circle for, like, it feels weird, but like to say, oh, like here's advice or whatever. I think everybody has to do things their own way. But I also think there can be something really helpful for your friend group. And something we certainly did was like when people were like, oh, I'm so sorry. We were like, we're not, like, nothing bad's happening. We're still a family. We still love each other. Like, nobody needs to choose a side. Like, I think you can really sort of give your friends permission to just know that everything's okay. And that, like, if they have a barbecue, they can invite both of you, and like not making people, feel like they need to be in the middle or choose a side. And obviously that's not everybody's reality, but I think, I don't know, so much of the time, I think we really have to say, I don't know, it feels weird to say what just came into my head, because it feels sort of, judgmental, but like, I think there are some times where like I have had to sort of like bring my inner adult to the table, certainly more than I did when we were married, and say, like, you got to be a big girl about this tonight, and like not like be in your feelings when, like it's not really going to serve you. It's not going to serve Mykee. It's certainly not going to serve our kiddo. And so I think there are times when we really need to say, like, how can I bring my inner adult to this conversation, situation, dynamic, versus like the part of me that really wants to feel shortchanged. And that's not easy. Like, please don't hear me as saying that's like an easy thing to do, but that's the work,
Yeah, that is the work. Like you said, it's definitely not easy to just take the high road all the time and be the adult in the situation, but you've done an amazing job of that. Um, there have been some times, but
Sure.
where I may not have been, but
Oh, that's not true. I thought you were like, there are some times you fall short. I'm like, I'm sure I'm human.
we all fall
No,
short.
but I mean, I think that's true of both of us. And I think both of us, I will say, do a really good job of like owning our 100% and saying like, you know what, I'm not proud of that. I could have said that better, like circling back and after we take a deep breath. And I think that's another thing I love to say to clients a lot is the universe allows U-turns. Like you can always like U-turn and say, I want to revisit what I said to you last night. I think sometimes just naming this is hard. We had like breakup during what I think was sort of like divorce boot camp because all of a sudden there was a global pandemic and I was like flooded with, clients who were sort of in crisis. Our kid was out of school. And so you were here a lot. And I was like, I just want to be divorced. You were like, yeah, me too. But it's like we had to work it out. It was like the universe was like, you guys like get in there and work it out. We were like two kids that were like in timeout together. But I think it was such a beautiful thing because we ended up really having to like name sometimes, okay, this is hard, but like we're going to get through this and you're doing a great job and thank you for seeing me and all of the things, like we really had to like turn up the volume on those tools,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me your thoughts on marriage today. Do you feel like you would get married again, Mykee? I feel like it's so funny. Like we, our kid just had his like holiday program and we were sitting next to one another. And what's beautiful and I feel really grateful for, to be honest, is that I think our relationship ending when you were talking about being in the apartment and having that moment of like feeling afraid, I think our relationship ended at a time where I had just lost a friend. And it made it easier for me somehow because this is going to sound weird, but like you weren't dying. Like I wasn't losing my friend. And so I kind of felt like, well, I still have Mykee in my life and maybe I can be a better friend to him than I was a wife, and it sort of made me feel better somehow. And I think in a lot of ways, I feel really grateful that I didn't have to lose my friend in our relationship changing form. And so we're at this holiday concert and you're in sort of like, you're in love and you're like in like a new relationship. And I was like so excited for you. And I think that that's like a really beautiful thing when you can get to that space where you're like genuinely happy that someone is making the person that you were married to happy in the way that that you didn't necessarily do for one another anymore,
Yeah.
So the question was, what are your thoughts on marriage? That was the question I asked you after pontificating for.
You want to know if I'm going to get married again, huh?
Not so much like if that's the plan, but like what, like would you like? Do you still believe in marriage? Do you think marriage is kind of a crock? Like, I think sometimes people after a divorce are like, I mean, I just wouldn't get married again,
And definitely after the divorce, I was like, never again. That was a stupid idea. I don't know how people. I don't know why people would do that.
Thank you.
That's the hurt part of you speaking, right? And then once you do meet somebody and somebody that kind of rocks your world, you're like, wow, this person is great.
Aww.
You're like, yeah, I could totally see myself with you. And you start exploring that option. And that's not for everybody. Again, I'm just, but yeah, I could see myself getting married again. It's not something now that I'm like, I have to do it, whereas as you were kind of talking about societal norms and like, I was like, I was on a track, like you had to get married. Kind of thing. And now I don't necessarily feel I need to do that. It would be because I want to, I want to show this person how much I love them or my commitment or whatever the case may be, but yeah, so I think marriage is an amazing thing. I think the level of commitment that someone is making to another person is tremendous and amazing. And so I think once again, the biggest problem with marriage, or not marriage, but what happens in a marriage, because marriage is just a construct, or, is that the lack of communication and not knowing thyself. And in our case being, and when you're young,
I appreciated the know thyself. Little Stoics. And go ahead. Sorry.
Well, yeah, you do, right? And when you're starting out, you don't really know, and then when you get a little bit more knowledge about yourself, and then you can potentially apply that to your relationship and hope that you guys can both move in the same stream. So it's important. It's really important, and I don't think we're given enough tools to really set that up. The only thing we really know is our parents and how they did it, and potentially someone that we see or a friend or something, and that's it. There's not really a handbook, and if it is, it's not really there. We don't really know about it until you come to podcasts like this, right? But yeah, just to sum it up, yeah, I do believe in marriage, and would I get married again? Yeah, but time will tell, I guess.
So what would you teach our kiddo about marriage? Like if he was like, Daddy, like if he asked you about marriage and like what your values are in terms of your mission for sharing your life with someone, what do you feel like is different today than it was when you got married all those years ago?
Well, before we got married, we went to therapy. We went to counseling, actually, I believe it was.
We did a whole lot of therapy.
Yeah.
It was good.
But I remember her asking me specifically, why do you want to get married? And I was like, well, I love her very much, and I wanted to get married. But yeah, she's like, you don't need to get married for that. And I was like, okay. And her idea was that you're getting married because you're like a corporation, and this corporation is teaching the employees, your children, how to run the business after you're gone. And I had always liked that analogy. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, so that stuck with me. So with that said, I would just tell our son the same thing, that, marriage is a sacred thing. You're doing it because you love this person and you want to honor them, not honor them, but you're making this commitment potentially for life, and like, it's a very big step. And, and once children are brought into it, make sure that you're modeling something good for them to follow, and, just do the best you can, but it's a sacred commitment, and just love your partner and honor them, and try to teach the employees how to run the business later.
I think the children being employees is so funny to me, but that tickles me quite a lot. I love it.
You're like child labor laws and all the rest of it. No.
I mean, I don't want to say it, but yeah. Well,
it was just a nice analogy, like I said.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know that I tell you often, but I am so grateful for you, to the point where, I don't know, I feel like I must have been really good in another life or something, because I've just had, not this one, but I've just had so many beautiful people in my life, and you've always been and are still one of the angels in my life, Mykee. You're just like the most beautiful soul. You've always had my back, and that has continued. And, it's so funny. Someone was asking me, I think it was my therapist, was asking me about like how many men I've trusted in my life. And I think like I got really emotional when she asked me the question. And I think it's because so much of what I was societally programmed to do, and certainly, by the women in my family, no fault of theirs. It's all like, I think a lot of like larger programming, but I was really sort of taught not to trust men, and I think that in a lot of ways that set us up and set me up in our marriage for not really being able to soften into the idea of trusting you and fully seeing you. And I know that you and I've had a ton of conversations around like making amends for all that stuff. So like, I feel pretty good about where we are, but I will say since our marriage ended, not only have I really, I believe, learned to trust men in a way that I wasn't able to before, but you are like one of the men in my life I would trust above anything. And I'm really grateful to you for being that, because it's a really sacred thing. And I love you. And I'm so grateful for your friendship. And I don't know. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk about how we do this thing called doing divorce differently.
Well, thanks for having me on. and thanks for being and thanks for being you. And thanks for being the best co-parent that I could ask for. And yeah, you make my job look a lot easier than it is by taking such good care of Cairo. And I definitely am thankful that you're my friend as well.
Right back at you, Selkin. All right. You guys take care.
All right.